My name is Eleanor Wright. I am 34 years old. My sister ruined me 12 years ago when I was 22 by planting fake evidence I had stolen money from our family business and spreading vicious rumors across our Grand Rapids neighborhood, leaving me shunned and nearly homeless while she covered her own debts. Now everything collides in this crowded hospital waiting room where my father battles a massive stroke and my sister waves old documents ready to expose those same lies again to the doctors and gathered family to seize control of his care and the estate. I stood there heart racing, ready to finally destroy her web of deceit once and for all. If you have ever had a sister who would burn your reputation to the ground just to get ahead, tell me in the comments what you would do right now, because I am living that nightmare. And I need to know I am not alone here. That moment in the hospital corridor felt like the past had clawed its way back into the room and refused to leave. I had spent the last 12 years building a quiet life as a customer success manager at a mid-sized software company in Grand Rapids, working my way up from entry level and proving to myself every single day that I was not the unreliable mess my sister always painted me as. My boss, Ethan Klein, had even promoted me twice because he saw how reliable I could be when no one was trying to sabotage me. Yet here we were again with my sister leading the charge like she always did. It had started so much earlier than that framing incident 12 years ago. My mother passed away from complications after surgery when I was 12, and my older sister, Quinn Wright, was 16. She stepped into the role of the responsible one right away, cooking meals, signing school forms, and acting like the perfect daughter, while my father leaned on her more and more. He praised her constantly for holding the family together, but he never once asked how I was coping with the loss. My sister used that gap to build her own little kingdom of control. She would casually mention to teachers or neighbors that I was struggling with grief in ways that made me seem unstable or difficult. Small comments at first, but they added up until people started looking at me sideways without ever hearing my side. My father never questioned any of it because my sister made him feel supported, and I just reminded him of the pain he was trying to forget. When my stepmother, Maria Wright, came into the picture 2 years later, my sister called her mom immediately, and the two of them formed this tight little alliance that left me on the outside. I learned to stay quiet and keep my head down, hoping I could just survive until I turned 18 and could move out. The real turning point came when my mother had set up a modest trust fund for each of us before she died. It was $68,000 apiece available at 21. My sister got hers first and blew through it in less than a year on flashy clothes trips and gifts for her boyfriend, Kyle Lang, who always had some get-rich-quick scheme going. By the time I turned 22, she was broke again and desperate. That is when she decided I was the perfect scapegoat. One ordinary Tuesday afternoon, I came home from my first real job at the software company to find my father waiting with bank statements and screenshots my sister had conveniently provided. She stood right behind him with that concerned, older sister look she had perfected over the years, and told him she had caught me transferring money from the family business account to my own to cover some secret debts. She even had fake transaction records printed out and a burner email account full of messages she claimed were from me. My father believed every word without checking anything. He looked me dead in the eye and said I was a disappointment who would never amount to anything, and that he was cutting me off completely until I got help for my problems. My sister nodded along like she was heartbroken for me, while her eyes glittered with satisfaction. I tried to explain, but the words stuck in my throat because I could see my father had already made up his mind. My stepmother stayed silent in the kitchen doorway, the way she always did when things got ugly. That night, I packed what I could carry and left with my best friend Emma Ellis waiting outside in her car. Emma had been my rock through high school, and she drove me to a cheap motel while I cried the whole way. She helped me find a new apartment and even lent me money for the first month when my father froze the small account I had. Without her, I do not know where I would have ended up. The rumors my sister spread after that were relentless. She told relatives and old family friends that I had been caught stealing and that I was unstable, just like she had always warned. My reputation in our tight-knit Grand Rapids community took a hit that followed me for months. Job interviews dried up for a while until I proved myself at the software company through sheer hard work. My boss, Ethan Klein, later told me he had heard whispers but decided to give me a chance anyway after seeing my performance in the first few weeks. That small act of trust from him meant more than he will ever know. My grandmother, Margaret Ford, heard the stories and immediately stepped in. She was 71 at the time and still sharp as ever, living in a modest house on the west side of town. She called my father and demanded he let her see the so-called evidence. When he refused, she hired a family lawyer named Justin Morales, who had been a friend of my late mother. Justin started digging quietly and found discrepancies right away, but before we could present anything, my father had already cut me off financially and told the extended family I was not to be trusted with anything important. The damage to my name was done, and it took years to rebuild. I managed to scrape by with Emma's help and my grandmother's quiet support. She paid for my community college classes in secret and made sure I had groceries some weeks when things got tight. Meanwhile, my sister moved in with Kyle and started acting like the golden daughter again, while quietly draining whatever was left of my father's patience and savings. I kept my head down, focused on my job, and tried to pretend the betrayal had not broken something inside me. 12 years later, the phone call came out of nowhere. My stepmother's voice was shaky on the line, saying my father had collapsed at home and was being rushed to the hospital with what turned out to be a severe stroke. I dropped everything and drove straight to the emergency room in Grand Rapids. When I walked into the waiting area, my sister was already there, pacing with a folder under her arm. She looked up, and the mask of concern slipped for just a second when she saw me. Then she smiled that same tight smile from all those years ago. My father was stable but unconscious, and the doctors needed family to make decisions about his care. My sister pulled me aside into a quiet corner of the corridor before anyone else could hear. She shoved the folder at me and said in a low voice laced with that familiar cold sarcasm that I should sign over any claim to his remaining assets right now, because everyone knew I had always been the problem child, and if I refused, she would walk into his room the moment he woke up and remind him exactly what I had done 12 years ago. She even had screenshots ready on her phone from old emails she had faked back then. My heart dropped because I knew how easily my father could still believe her. I felt my stomach twist, but I kept my voice steady and asked her why she was doing this again after all this time. She laughed softly and leaned in closer, her eyes sharp as she whispered that some people never change, and that with my father out of commission, she was not about to let me swoop in and play the caring daughter now. The words hit like a slap because they carried all the old resentment she had nursed for decades. Before I could respond, my father's doctor stepped into the hallway calling for the family. My sister turned on her heel and started walking toward the room like she owned the place. I grabbed her arm and told her we needed to talk this through privately, but she shook me off and said loud enough for the nurses nearby to hear that I had caused enough drama in this family already. The looks from the staff made my cheeks burn with an old, familiar shame. That was when my best friend Emma Ellis texted me out of the blue, asking if I needed her to come down because she had heard from my grandmother that my father was in the hospital. Emma had stayed close all these years, and she knew my sister's games better than most. I quickly typed back that things were escalating fast and that my sister was already trying to rewrite history again. Emma replied that she was on her way and that I should not sign anything until Justin Morales could review the papers. Meanwhile, my stepmother, Maria Wright, sat in the corner, looking exhausted and avoiding eye contact with both of us. When my sister noticed her watching, she turned and said in that sweet, concerned tone she always used around my father, that it was probably best if I left because my presence might upset him when he woke up, given our history. My stepmother just nodded weakly without saying a word. The betrayal in that small moment stung deeper than I expected, because even after everything, she still defaulted to my sister's version of events. I stood there frozen for a second, remembering all the times my sister had twisted the narrative and my father had gone along with it because it was easier. But this time something felt different. The folder in my hand felt heavier than it should, and I realized I was not the scared 22-year-old anymore. I had built a career. My boss, Ethan Klein, trusted me with a fiancé, Tyler Ruiz, who loved me without conditions, and a support system my grandmother and Emma had helped me create. My sister must have sensed the shift because she stepped closer and lowered her voice again, her words dripping with that cutting sarcasm she reserved just for me. She said I could keep pretending I was the victim, but we both knew the truth, and if I forced her hand, she would make sure the entire hospital staff and our extended family heard exactly how unreliable I had always been. The threat hung in the air like a storm about to break, and I could see the calculation in her eyes. She was not bluffing. Just then, my grandmother, Margaret Ford, arrived, leaning on her cane, but moving with the same fierce determination she had shown all those years ago. She took one look at the scene and positioned herself between me and my sister, without a word at first. My sister tried to smile and say this was a family matter that did not need outsiders, but my grandmother cut her off sharply and reminded her that she had been part of this family long enough to know exactly who caused the real damage. The tension in the corridor thickened, and I could feel the eyes of the nursing staff on us. My sister glanced toward my father's room and then back at me with a smirk that said she was one step away from walking in there and dropping her bomb. I knew I had only seconds before she made good on the threat, and the thought of my father waking up to another round of her lies made my blood run cold. My sister took another step toward the door, and her fingers brushed the handle. Before she could slip inside, I blocked her path. She stopped short, her face tightening as she leaned in and whispered that I had always been the unreliable one who dragged the family down, and if I did not back off right now, she would make sure the doctors knew exactly why they should listen to her instead of me on any care decisions. My sister then yanked the folder from my hands, flipped it open, and waved the old faked transaction records, while raising her voice just enough to draw my stepmother closer, saying in that sweet, concerned tone that everyone in the family knew I had stolen from the business account back then, and that my sudden appearance now was probably just another attempt to get my hands on what little my father had left after his stroke. My grandmother, Margaret Ford, moved faster than I expected for a woman in her early 80s and positioned herself right beside me, her cane tapping once against the tile floor like a warning. She looked my sister straight in the eye and told her that dredging up old lies in a hospital hallway was not going to help my father recover, and that if she kept pushing this way, the only person who would look bad was her. My sister's face tightened for a second, but she recovered quickly and laughed that soft, sarcastic laugh she used when she wanted to make someone feel small, saying my grandmother had always taken my side, even when the evidence was right in front of everyone, and that protecting me had only enabled my problems for years. Just then, my best friend Emma Ellis burst through the main waiting area doors, breathing hard from the drive across town. She walked straight up to me, pulling me into a quick hug before turning to face my sister and telling her calmly but firmly that waving around old papers in a place like this was not going to intimidate anyone who actually cared about facts. My sister's eyes narrowed, and she shot back with a sarcastic laugh that, of course, I would drag my work friends into this, because I could never handle family matters without outside help. The jab stung because it twisted my 12 years of independence into proof I was still the outsider. My sister was not done escalating. She pulled out her phone right there and started scrolling through screenshots she claimed were from the same period 12 years ago, showing transfers she said I had made. She held the screen toward my stepmother and said in a voice dripping with false worry that if the doctors needed someone stable to make medical choices for my father, it should be her, because I had proven I could not be trusted with anything important. The threat was clear. She was ready to drag the entire history into this moment and use it against me in front of the medical staff who were already starting to notice the raised voices. Emma squeezed my arm and whispered that my boss, Ethan Klein, had just texted her. He was willing to write a quick character reference if things got ugly, because he remembered how hard I had worked to rebuild after the rumors. That small reminder gave me a flicker of strength, but my sister must have sensed it because she stepped even closer and delivered another sharp jab straight at my core, saying I could bring all the friends and bosses I wanted, but nothing would change the fact that I had left the family when it needed me most, and now I only showed up when there was something to gain. My grandmother stepped in again this time, raising her voice enough to make the head nurse look over from the station. She told my sister that continuing this kind of harassment in a hospital was only going to delay the care my father actually needed, and that she had kept quiet long enough about the real reasons the family business had struggled back then. My sister's face flushed for the first time, and she shot back that my grandmother was the one who had always babied me instead of making me face consequences. Then my fiancé, Tyler Ruiz, walked in carrying 2 coffees he had grabbed from the hospital cafe, thinking it might help calm everyone down. He had driven straight from his shift at the community center where he worked with kids, and the moment he saw the standoff, his expression hardened. He set the coffees down and moved to stand beside me, saying quietly but loud enough for my sister to hear that this was not the time or place to rehash old family wounds, especially when my father was still unconscious. My sister turned on him next, her sarcasm sharpening as she said that of course I would bring my perfect supportive fiancé to play hero, but that did not erase the fact I had once nearly bankrupted the family with my irresponsibility. The words landed like another slap, and for a second I felt the old urge to shrink back and let her steamroll over everything. But Emma caught my eye and gave me a small nod that reminded me I was not alone this time. My sister must have noticed the shift in the group because she glanced toward my father's room again and lowered her voice to a threatening whisper, meant only for me saying, if I did not agree right now to let her handle all the medical and financial decisions alone, she would call every relative in the extended family and share the old evidence packet she had kept updated over the years. My stepmother finally spoke up, then her voice shaky as she asked my sister to lower her tone because the doctors had warned that stress could affect my father's recovery. But my sister waved her off and said that protecting the family from me was more important than worrying about volume right now. The dismissal was so casual and cutting that even my stepmother looked taken aback for a moment, though she still did not push back. My grandmother pulled me aside for a quick second and whispered that Justin Morales, the lawyer who had helped us years ago, was already on standby and could review anything my sister tried to push through. The news gave me a breath of relief, but my sister had moved again this time, actually cracking the door to my father's room and peering inside. She turned back to me one last time, her eyes locking onto mine with that same satisfied flicker from 12 years ago, and said the clock was ticking, and if I forced her hand, she would walk in there right now and make sure my father heard her version first. The door creaked open wider under her hand, and she slipped inside before anyone could stop her. I followed right on her heels with my grandmother close behind and my best friend Emma grabbing my arm to keep me steady. My fiancé Tyler stayed in the hallway ready to call Justin Morales if things turned legal fast. My sister reached my father's bedside first and leaned over him, her voice dropping into that perfect mix of concern and poison she always used when she wanted to control the narrative. She started telling him how I had shown up out of nowhere after years of silence, and how she had brought the old records just in case I tried anything shady with his care or the remaining family assets. My father stirred, then his eyes fluttering open for the first time since the stroke. Instead of the quiet confusion I braced for, he pushed himself up slightly against the pillows, his good hand shaking, as he looked straight at my sister and let out a frustrated bark of a laugh that turned into a sharp, defensive outburst. He told her in a raspy voice that she did not need to rehash everything right now because he remembered how hard she had worked to keep the family business afloat back then, and that I had always been the one who disappeared when things got tough. The words landed like a fresh betrayal because he was choosing her side again without even asking for my version, and the sudden intensity in his tone made the whole room freeze. My sister seized on it immediately, her eyes lighting up as she leaned closer and delivered another cutting jab straight at me, saying that my father was right, and some daughters never learned how to stay loyal when the family needed them most. Emma stepped forward, then her voice steady, as she reminded everyone that those old accusations had never been proven and that my boss, Ethan Klein, had already offered a written statement about my reliability at work if the doctors needed character references for care decisions. My sister spun on her heel and shot back with a sarcastic laugh that, of course, I would drag my work friends into this because I could never handle family matters without outside help. The tension snapped when my grandmother raised her cane and tapped it hard on the floor, demanding that my sister stop using my father's hospital bed as a stage for her old grudges. My sister's face twisted, and she turned on my grandmother with another sharp remark saying that protecting me had only made things worse for everyone, and that my grandmother had always enabled my so-called problems instead of making me face them. My father interrupted again, this time with a shocking shift that none of us expected. He looked at my sister, then at me, and muttered that maybe things had gotten out of hand 12 years ago, but that my sister had been the one keeping the books straight, and he could not risk more mistakes now. That was when the major twist hit. My sister pulled out her phone and played a short voice memo she claimed was from a recent conversation with my father's accountant. The recording had her asking leading questions, and the accountant confirming that small transfers had gone missing from the family business account again last month. She held the phone up for everyone to hear and said with cold sarcasm that this proved I had not changed at all, and that if I stayed involved, I would drain what little my father had left for his recovery. My heart slammed against my ribs because I knew I had not touched anything, but the timing felt too perfect, and I realized she must have orchestrated this latest leak to use against me right now. Emma grabbed her own phone and quickly texted Ethan Klein, asking him to verify any business records he could access through our company's old client files, since the family business had once been a customer. The wait felt endless while my sister kept jabbing, saying that bringing in more outsiders only proved how guilty I looked. My father's reaction shifted again in a frustrating way that left me reeling. Instead of demanding proof, he let out another short, defensive outburst, telling my sister she was right to be cautious because family money needed protection and that I should step back for now. Later that evening, after my father had stabilized enough to speak more clearly, Justin Morales arrived at the hospital with preliminary findings. He explained in the private family meeting that the new missing money traced back to accounts my sister had access to, and that the voice memo she played had been edited. My sister tried to interrupt with another sarcastic attack, saying that outsiders like Justin always twisted things to favor me, but my father surprised everyone again. This time, his reaction was a quiet but firm interruption, where he told my sister to let the lawyer finish because maybe they had both made mistakes in believing the easiest story. It was not full vindication, but it was enough to shift the medical power of attorney temporarily to my grandmother while the investigation continued. I won the immediate battle. My sister was barred from making solo decisions about my father's care, and the estate documents were frozen until the accountant's full review. Yet the victory came with an irreversible loss that settled heavy in my chest. My father never fully turned against my sister. He still called her his reliable one in quiet moments, and the family ties that remained felt thin and fragile at best. I set firm boundaries that night, telling my sister that any further contact or attempts to spread lies would go straight to Justin Morales and the authorities. She laughed one final time and said I would always be the one who walked away from family, but her eyes showed she knew the game had changed. My stepmother chose to stay neutral, again slipping out of the hospital without a word of support, and that small quiet choice confirmed how alone I truly was in this branch of the family. My grandmother hugged me tight in the parking lot and reminded me that choosing peace was not weakness. Emma and Tyler drove me home that night, and we sat in my living room in Grand Rapids, going over the day until the sun came up. I kept my job at the software company, and my boss, Ethan Klein, even gave me extra time off to handle the legal follow-up. Life moved forward, but the loss lingered. I had protected myself and stopped my sister's latest scheme, yet the family I once hoped to reconnect with slipped away for good. Some bonds break so cleanly that rebuilding them is no longer the point. I learned that protecting my peace sometimes means accepting the empty space where family used to be. My father recovered enough to go home, but our conversations stayed surface level, and my sister kept her distance under legal pressure. I chose myself fully this time, and the freedom tasted bittersweet on the tongue. Thank you for listening to my story. If you have ever faced a sister whose lies kept reshaping your entire world, what would you do when the chance to finally push back arrived, but the cost was losing the last threads of family forever? Drop your thoughts below, because sharing these moments helps us all feel a little less alone.